FedTech, our community now is thousands of people between our entrepreneurs, our mentors, our corporate partners, our investors, our government partners. So when the community can kind of meet each other and become more than the sum of the parts, that gets us really excited.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how federal laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. Today, we're joined by Ben Solomon, founder and CEO of FedTech, a venture studio and accelerator that helps turn groundbreaking research from federal labs into real-world solutions. After starting his journey through the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program, Ben built FedTech to bridge the gap between government-sponsored R&D and private sector entrepreneurship. We'll talk about how FedTech helps entrepreneurs and innovators bring federal technologies to market, how they're changing the landscape of tech transfer, and what's next in this fast-moving ecosystem. Ben, thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your own journey. What first got you interested in the intersection of entrepreneurship and federal R&D?
Sure, definitely. Yeah. So, and actually, this has been a story I've been telling a fair amount recently because we actually just passed our 10th year of operation. And 2 weeks ago, we had a big celebration where we celebrated with our company, our full company, and then our partners and our customers all came together. So I'll tell a version of the same story that I told at that event. So I was always like a business-minded person that wanted to be a technology-based entrepreneur, but I was never like an engineer, and never a scientist myself. So I always felt this kind of craving to be doing something technology-based. And I really found that mechanism when I went to business school at University of Maryland, where as a young MBA student, I started hanging out a lot on the other side of campus. So if anyone's been to the campus of UMD at Maryland, it's about a mile between the engineering and the business school, which I always think that, like, if you were building a campus from scratch, you would want to put engineering and business right next to each other, is kind of my big hypothesis that I would have. So I was very passionate about starting a technology-based company. I ended up meeting some roboticists when I was in business school. So this would have been really about 12-ish years ago. And I started a robotics company, but about that same time was brought into the NSF's I-Corps program. And the I-Corps team there that was at the time, Gene Chang and Edmund Pendleton and Craig Dye, some of the great leaders that University of Maryland has working on commercialization, they asked me if I would experiment with building a pilot within the I-Corps that would be working with federal labs. And out of that pilot became FedTech, and the rest, I can share more about the history. But what's been interesting just on a personal level is the work we do at FedTech gets to really bridge both the business and the technical. In that we start a lot of technology-based companies, we accelerate many companies. So we've worked with over 1,000 companies that have gone on to raise over $5 billion. A lot of those are coming from the federal ecosystem, whether it's companies that we've spun off from federal labs, whether it's SBIR, whether it's companies that have won prize challenges. But yeah, so that's kind of my journey has been, going from being a young, aspiring entrepreneur to when I started, so the robotics company didn't end up going too far. I really consider that like my first venture, but was able to find, a mechanism to start a second company with FedTech that I'm sure we'll talk more about here.
Was there anything specifically that you took away from that experience of founding FedTech that about bridging the gap between research and real world impact?
Yeah, well, so definitely the premise of the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program that I think a lot of the listeners are probably going to be relatively familiar with. The premise is to go out and do lots of market discovery. So the idea initially, and the program has largely stayed the same over the years, is in the course of 7 weeks, if you're a technical researcher, to go out and do 100 customer interviews around your research before you go and do more engineering, or before you'd ever would start a company. So that idea of like just intensive customer discovery, intensive market discovery definitely permeates everything about FedTech programs. So we always have that as a core component of every accelerator that we've run. And to me, that's like kind of the one lesson that I would take away and encourage, really anyone that's listening to this to if you're looking to commercialize and looking to bridge that gap, you want to be really making sure that the market is pulling you into commercializing a specific invention versus trying to push, something that might not have a demand signal. So that was kind of one big lesson. And then another that stuck with me was just experimenting and trying things and kind of, it's like a toddler sort of touching something that's hot. It's like when you touch something that's hot and you make a mistake, a kid will pull back and they don't do that again. And I think early stage entrepreneurship is very much, at least for me, was like that, where we were starting the FedTech programming, and like when we did something that worked, we did more of it. When we did something that didn't work, we stopped doing it. And like having entrepreneurship be this highly iterative process is another lesson that I've kind of taken away from those early days.
So now tell us about what is FedTech and how do you describe its role in the federal innovation ecosystem?
Sure. So we consider ourselves really a bridge between these communities that don't often talk well together. So federal R&D and entrepreneurship. So we bridge that gap really in several ways. So we will run programs. Probably our most unique offering is what we call the Startup Studio. And that's where we'll take inventions from research labs. We work with over 150 between federal labs, national labs, universities, and even some small companies we've worked with. We'll take inventions that we think have the commercial opportunity and go out, and instead of kind of trying to have the researcher be the lead entrepreneur, we take a community-based approach, and we'll go and recruit, usually it's 3 founders. 1 to 2 founders in that group have a technical expertise related to the technology. And then usually one is kind of the business hustle, entrepreneurial kind of archetype. And we take those 3 entrepreneurs and we pair them up with the invention and build teams really from the ground up that will go through the first phase. Is all about that market exploration that I mentioned, where, is there an opportunity? What are the basic bounds of like a business model around the invention? And then if we can get to those answers, within, usually it's a couple months, we feel really good about that. And there's not always an opportunity to spin off a company. But about 70% of the time when we form a team, it ends up starting a company that goes on to license. So we've spun off now 200 companies from that program. And we're starting to see some really fun examples of those companies going through, fundraising, winning SBIR. We had a company called Canopy Aerospace that just got acquired. This was a NASA invention that was the technology is like a coating for hypersonics. And our team, we brought together entrepreneurs that were just terrifically talented, and they were able to license from NASA and start scaling up and being really scrappy. They found funding in all these different pockets up until being able to raise, significant institutional capital, scaled up manufacturing of this technology in Colorado, and then just got bought a couple months ago. Yeah, so the entrepreneurs had a positive exit. So our startup studio, yes, is definitely one of our biggest things, probably the most tech transfer relevant. But we also run other programs that are accelerators that are helping companies that are usually brand new to working with government, helping them understand what it means to be a partner to the government, helping them scale their products, helping them scale their offerings. So we run accelerators. And then the last thing I'll mention that we do that could be of interest to the community with FLC is researcher training and in what we call internal innovation, where it's teaching not entrepreneurship, but more intrapreneurship. So for example, we'll work with Army Research Lab on a terrific program called Mission Transition, where we go into the lab and train research staff. And the goal is to really maximize the likelihood that their activities are going to turn into real outcomes, right? That their research is going to become hopefully products that can be used in the case of the Army by the warfighter, in the near term is kind of the goal there. So happy to go deeper on any one of those that are interesting.
Yeah, well, I would love to know 200 plus companies and even more that have gone through the program. What are some of the common threads you see in terms of the challenges that they face that FedTech helps them to overcome?
Yeah, sure. So the first one is that technologies don't equal products, right? So when we work with a tech in a lab, it's often, very very much, at a bench level. And like when I think about the sort of other end of the spectrum is like something that's a product that can be sold and that solves a problem that someone is willing to pay for. That gap and that development takes time, it takes skill, and it takes money. So what FedTech tries to do in general is help on all three of those. In that if we can do things to shorten the time, with great mentors, if we can do things to increase the skills, of the entrepreneurs through training, we do that. And then we also have gotten pretty good at helping our companies that we spin off from national labs, federal labs, to be able to win SBIRs and be able to win prize money, like some of the early non-dilutive capital that is more risk tolerant for the phase of company that we're starting. Normally, we find that it's tough for a company to come right out of the startup studio program and be able to raise a true angel round. It just is they're too early. There's too much risk. It's so a big common thread, yeah, is increasing the speed at which you can go from tech to product. Other things that we focus on a lot are just the interpersonal dynamics of the teammates. So we put together people who have in some cases not even met each other, and we throw them in the pot. We have them work together in a very intense cohort-based structure. And then what comes out on the other end is often a startup. But for anyone that's been involved with a startup, that you know that it's an emotional process, that there's a lot of stress that everyone feels. You don't have a lot of structure, right? So all of these are interpersonal challenges that, we try to bridge really by just getting our companies terrific mentorship and people that have really gone through that stage of company building. We find that if we can just have a community around these founders, that it just makes their life a lot easier. It makes them a lot happier. It makes them a lot more successful. But man, it's challenging, right? You got to get everything kind of all the stars aligning and everybody's personalities gelling to be successful out of the gate.
So on the other side of the coin, are there traits or green flags that you look for that tend to lead to success in terms of matching researchers or technologies with entrepreneurs?
Yeah, great question. So our best entrepreneurs, I would say, are a unique combination of being highly flexible but highly determined. Where when you're starting an early stage company, it's like you have to be flexible in that you don't quite know who your customer is going to be. You don't quite know what the market's going to look like. You don't even know whether you're going to be going to market with the exact technology that you start with in a FedTech program, right? A lot of times our tech is a jumping off point to potentially developing a new product, that's inspired by versus directly, a function of the initial IP. So our best entrepreneurs have a flexibility in that they're most concerned with solving a customer problem and being able to find kind of a willingness for the market to pay versus being like overly invested in the IP. That being said, like it also just takes an immense amount of determination, and like you got to be willing to kind of run to a wall multiple times and then either go around it or bust through that wall. So our best entrepreneurs are just incredibly resourceful and like willing to hustle and like and piece together funding from different places, piece together resourcing from different communities, and sort of see the bigger picture and be a unifier, versus I would say entrepreneurs that are looking for kind of an easy route to say, okay, I'm going to go and raise $15 million right out of the gate to fund my startup when I'm spinning off a company from a federal lab. It just doesn't happen very often, right? So it's like you have to be scrappy, and our best people usually are.
And you've mentioned a couple specifics. A company that spun out of a NASA technology and some others. Are there any others, or could you describe more in that example how it sort of exemplifies what you were just talking about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can do both. So in the case of Canopy Aerospace, the NASA spinoff that I just mentioned, we had what made me really proud, and we just at our corporate retreat a couple of weeks ago brought this up as like a unique example of FedTech working as a company and as a program. We had a scenario where one of we recruited one of the founders, was like an ex-Air Force alum or veteran, and had an understanding of technology and aerospace technology. So we found a great lead entrepreneur. But one of the cool parts of that team was an entrepreneur that had actually gone through our program several years earlier with a different technology. It was a material that the Navy had developed, totally unrelated. He had started a company that had been, I would say, moderately successful. But when they sort of ceased operations for the Navy technology, he came back and mentored with us and taught as an instructor at FedTech before joining this other company that was a NASA spinoff. And now he's the CTO of that company and is doing great things. So what was really fun about that was just to see, FedTech, our community now is thousands of people between our entrepreneurs, our mentors, our corporate partners, our investors, our government partners. So when the community can kind of meet each other and become more than the sum of the parts, that gets us really excited.
Beautiful. And beyond the companies that have come out of FedTech, are there other indicators of impact that you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll point everybody. We just published a 10-year impact report that I'm super proud of. It took us months to develop. We started off and we said, okay, we're going to put together 10 or 15 pages, telling the story of FedTech, telling the story of our impact. And it ended up being closer to 70 pages of just stories and stats from all of our programs over the last 10 years. So I'd encourage if anyone is interested in reading that, you can see the report and sign up for it at fedtech.io. But some of we've created just thousands of new jobs. Our companies have gone on to raise over $5 billion of capitals. And we consider that when we look at that number, it's public funding through grants and contracts, but also private capital. So we have the ability to scan Crunchbase and other databases that kind of show private capital raises. So that $5 billion number was just staggering when we actually kind of connected and saw the scale of the impact. And then crossing the 1,000 company milestone was also amazingly significant to me to just look at that. We've actually had 1,000 companies go through our various programs now.
Wow, that's huge. That's huge. And we'll make sure that report is linked on this episode page as well, so people have a quick way to see it. But, FedTech's programs, they've supported innovations in fields from energy and health and national security. Are there any particular technology areas where you're seeing a lot of momentum right now?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so obviously the big buzzword now is AI, with just the amount of the number of AI startups. So like I one of the cool parts of my job is I get to travel a lot, and I was just at a conference in Dubai a couple of weeks ago, and there were it was a startup investor conference. So tech startups meeting investors is kind of the big theme, and probably out of the 3,000 companies or so, about 2,000 or more were AI companies.
Wow.
And even those that are doing something else that's not necessarily immediately, they would still think of themselves as AI companies. So everything is AI, relevant technologies represent even 40% of the S&P right now. And I get really interested in the role of AI and the federal labs, right? So if you look at, almost every lab now, it has an AI specific or, machine learning specific research program with great infrastructure. And it's a story that I've been interested in trying to tell more. I haven't quite figured out the right way of just, what is the role of the federal lab system in this AI boom. So yeah, that's something if anyone is interested in collaborating on that, please, reach out to me.
Well, and that leads me so nicely into my next question, which is just how do you see the federal tech transfer landscape evolving in the next 5 to 10 years and FedTech's role playing into that future?
Yeah, so I would love to see, I would say, increasingly less barriers to entry, especially for entrepreneurs that have not interacted with federal labs. Too often I see that just again, you have these communities that desperately want to work together, right? Entrepreneurs with federal labs and tech transfer professionals, but just there's something lost in that translation layer between the two. And I just wonder, like, the more that we could be having simplified licensing agreements, simplified. I'm a big believer in credas, the value of credas, having the ability to create bridges for young companies to sign credas with federal labs that allow for even light collaboration, and then to find funding mechanisms, right? If we could be collectively, identifying pots of money to say, okay, we don't need to do a $1 million creda. Let's do a $10,000 creda and find a way to just get, the company and the researcher working together. And out of that can come, immensely positive outcomes. So I would say, yeah, increasing just the rate of communication would be one, big thing. I would like to see more funding also for companies that want to commercialize. So right now, SBIR represents probably the most reliable source of funding if you want to, get a technology out of a lab and start that process of commercialization. But I really think there should be a whole separate, line of funding that could be just for commercialization, relevant activities, and that could be, some of that could potentially be flowing to the lab. Some of it, would be flowing to the company to do some of that initial product development. Again, going from tech to product is such a big gap. So it's definitely something, we interact fairly frequently with Capitol Hill, and it's something that's a story that we tell pretty often. Is just that you got to have additional resources if you want to see commercialization as a driver of economic growth. You got to have the funding there to drive that.
And there's a lot of great advice from that to some of the other things we've talked about already. You've given a lot of great advice. Is there anything else in terms of insight or advice that you would offer to federal lab professionals, entrepreneurs, or students who want to get involved in tech transfer and commercialization?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I'll take each of those actually one by one. So for tech transfer professionals, I would say move faster than you're used to, make it easier, right? Recognize that like the entrepreneurs are often going to be so brand new to working with a federal lab that they may not do everything correctly. They may not always, signal, the same kind of intent that you're used to seeing, within the lab community. That's okay. Recognize that, be a collaborator, and consider yourselves to be on the same side of the table when you're negotiating versus, on separate sides trying to sort of get an advantage, and so many of the tech transfer professionals that we work with definitely have that mindset. Same advice goes for the entrepreneurs. I would say, we tell our entrepreneurs often to make it easy on the lab by, like, even when you're doing a licensing deal, don't redline, the agreement to the point where like so many things have to get approved on the lab side. Like if there are things you can live with that are maybe less optimal, just roll with it. And like the speed is definitely something you're going for when you're looking to process agreements. So that would be the advice for the labs. And then for students, I would really encourage students that are listening to consider tech transfer, consider commercialization and entrepreneurship support as like a viable career option. So we have a wonderful program that we've run with Department of Energy now for a couple of years, where we actually take students from universities and embed them with tech transfer offices within the national labs of DOE. And they can commercialize technology, but they also are looking at just learning what it means to be a T2 professional. And I get really excited about that. If we could have some of our best and brightest students coming into the field, that's going to help us all and pay dividends down the line.
That's excellent. Right. Because to my knowledge, there's no college pathway to tech transfer. People tend to kind of back into it or stumble into it. And to get that foundation earlier and stronger would be an excellent thing.
Absolutely. Yep.
Are there other new or upcoming initiatives at FedTech that our listeners should know about?
Yeah, so we're always running programs. So you can go to our website and see. Typically we have run about 20 to 30 accelerators a year. So that could be our startup studio program, where we're again the labs can participate by applying to send us technologies. You can participate as a mentor, if you want to actually work with the entrepreneurial teams. So that's always a great, and we have multiple programs, that are going to be kicking off in the next couple of months. Other, accelerators that are coming up. Yeah, we're doing more even internationally. So we've started running a program with India called Indus Bridge, where we we'll take Indian-based companies that we think have defense relevance and bring them over to the U.S. market and run an immersion where they can be starting to meet with prime contractors, funders, partners. So we're really excited to be doing more international programming. As well as, another thing I'll mention that FedTech is very passionate about is we work with big companies on connecting them to the federal lab system. So some of the engagements I can't really go into details about, but we have multiple, Fortune 500 companies that are very excited to be seeing what's going on in federal labs. And if FedTech can be a bridge to that happening, that's a good thing. That makes us go to bed happy.
That sounds like a lot to be excited about. Ben Solomon, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for all that FLC does. Really, it just is. It's a wonderful community, and we're grateful to be a part of it.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in for this conversation and spreading the word about this podcast. Tell your friends and colleagues about the podcast and leave us a review and rating because that helps other people find us. Subscribe and listen to more episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Check the show notes or the episode page at federallabs.org for links to more resources and information that came up in our conversation. Thanks as always to our producer and digital marketing manager, Carly Dunow, graphics manager, Danny Batchelor, web content and systems manager, Jess Klein, and the FLC staff and community for your support. We'll see you back in 2 weeks on Transfer Files Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.